So, welcome to Demystifying CMMC, what every Apex consultant needs to know. If we go to the next slide, please, Worley. So this is just a brief overview of the agenda. We're going to talk about what CMMC is and who it applies to. I know we have a whole bunch of different types of people who are on this call and who have maybe different types of understanding of CMMC and who it applies to. So we're going to make sure that we level set that. We're going to talk about the key compliance requirements within CMMC and then also dive into a real world case study of one of our customers at PreVeil. And then we'll also talk just briefly about PreVeil's compliance platform and how we assist our customers in becoming CMMC compliant. And then at the end, we'll be addressing any questions that you may have, and feel free to put them in the chat. As we're going through, you'll see a little QA button at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to add any of your questions there, and we'll answer them at the end. Next slide, please. So let's first start out with what is CMMC. So as you see here, CMMC is the Cyber Security Maturity Model Certification. It's a framework that has been in place, well, it started back in 2019. Now, CMMC is not actually a new requirement in a lot of ways. I know that sounds weird because everybody's, oh, this is brand new. CMMC's final rule just came out. The CMMC requirement is for the validation, meaning an external validation of what you're already expected to do under something called DFAR 7012, which you see here. So it is a validation of compliance with the DFAR 7012 requirements that are for NIST 800-171 implementation. So as you see on the second bullet, the primary focus of DFAR 7012, having the NIST 800-171 requirement, the whole point of CMMC at all is to make sure that CUI, or controlled unclassified information, is protected. So we have the DFAR 7012 clause, which, by the way, that came out back late December of 2017, so it's been around for quite a while. If you have a DFAR 7012 clause, or if you have someone you're working with who has a DFAR 7012 clause, they are already expected to have had NIST 800-171 implemented. Now, the CMMC piece is not officially law. There is a CMMC law right now, but there is a very limited number of contracts that's being rolled out into, and it's more of a phased approach with CMMC. But again, CMMC is the validation of what is already expected to be implemented and has been expected to be implemented since December of 2017. So it's an interesting sort of relationship, but it's an important one to understand. Contractors who possess, process, store, or transmit CUI will be expected to self-assess annually. That's going to be forever. You're always going to be expected. If you are familiar with the SPRS system, that is the supplier risk management system that the government uses internally. If you have an active contract with the DoD, you probably already have put in a SPRS score, and that SPRS score is directly associated with NIST 800-171 implementation. And again, this is all wrapped around CUI processing, storing, and transmitting. So on top of the self-assessment that you're going to have to do annually, no matter what, for the SPRS score, there will then also, once CMMC is put into contracts, CMMC will expect you to also get a third party to validate that you have properly implemented NIST 800-171 as it is applied to your CUI boundary. Now, that's also a really important point. You don't have to actually include your entire organization inside your CUI boundary. What a CUI boundary means is, where does CUI come into your organization? How does it interact with people and technologies and facilities inside your organization? And then how does it leave your organization? Maybe your entire organization needs to have CUI access. Maybe they don't. So just remember that CMMC is all about where the CUI is flowing, not necessarily your entire organization. Now, the CMMC validation process is not annual. The self-assessment will always be annual. CMMC, getting that third party to come in and validate, that's just once every 3 years. So that's important. We've got annually with the self-assessment, every 3 years with the verified CMMC assessment. Next slide, please. So now that we've talked a little bit at a high level about CMMC, maybe we need to dive in a little bit more into that DFAR 7012, which I just referenced. So we already talked about the NIST 800-171 implementation. So that's the 110 controls and 320 assessment objectives that have to be fully implemented within your CUI boundary. And remember, it doesn't have to be your entire organization. It can be if you'd like to, but we always encourage to scope down because remember, you're going to have to maintain this for as long as you have DoD contracts. So you want to make sure that it's as tiny as you can make it so that you can manage it as easily as possible in the future. There's also other requirements in DFAR 7012 outside of the NIST 80171 implementation. One of those is a 72-hour incident reporting requirement. So if you have an incident, and this is not a situation where this is a very important delineation to make. There's a spillage of CUI and an incident with CUI. The government, when they were talking about an incident, if there is something that has left your possession and now could cause some sort of harm, either perceived or implied or actual, that's what an incident is. If you, as your CUI, you're a CUI authorized person in your organization, maybe you make a mistake and you accidentally send CUI to one of the other people in your organization, but that person maybe isn't a CUI approved person, that's considered a spillage because that information didn't actually fall out of your organization. Yes, it went to the wrong person, but you still have the control of that information. So that's a very important distinction to make. A lot of people get confused on that. So if you did have an incident where somebody was trying to actually, let's say that somebody did, for whatever reason, send it to someone completely outside of your organization and maybe there's no way to control it and you don't know what's going to happen to it and this is a very scary situation for you, that's when you want to make sure to report that and let the DoD know, hey, there was an incident here, we had an issue, and you have 72 hours to do that. Then the DoD will come and do investigations of what happened, and there's all kinds of information about that specifically if you want to read it on DFAR 7012. The third requirement that DFAR 7012 has is the FedRAMP Moderate Cloud Solutions requirement. What does that mean? So if you're using a cloud service provider or a CSP, so for example, PreVeil is a CSP. We're a cloud service provider because we ourselves do not have the servers. Everything is actually on AWS GovCloud. They are the ones who manage that, and then our customers access it from there. You are not hosting that server on your own internal premises, right? You're not dealing with that server. There's on premises, which would be inside your organization. That server is being managed by you. You're dealing with everything on site. And then there are cloud options like PreVeil and others that end up being more where you inherit some of that maintenance and physical security and those types of controls. If you choose to use a cloud service provider like PreVeil or many others, you have to make sure that they are either FedRAMP authorized or FedRAMP equivalent. Now, what does that mean? FedRAMP authorization means that you are authorized to sell your cloud service product within the US government. If you don't have that designation, you might have what PreVeil has. We were the first company to be recognized by the DoD as FedRAMP Moderate Equivalent. And FedRAMP Moderate Equivalency has a whole list of different requirements that it has to have. But you have to use, if you're going to use a cloud service provider in support of your CMMC and your NIST 80171 implementation, you have to make sure that the cloud service provider you're using is either FedRAMP Moderate at the authorized level or what PreVeil is, FedRAMP equivalent. And if you are looking at anyone who is FedRAMP equivalent, make sure that they can actually give you a letter of attestation that proves that. That's very important. Next slide, please. So who needs to comply with CMMC? We've talked about what it is. We've talked about how long it's been here. We've talked about why it started in the first place, but who needs to actually do this? Essentially, if you are holding CUI or going to be interacting with CUI, and honestly, if you have a DFAR 7012 clause already, the odds are probably in favor that you're also going to have to adhere to CMMC. Especially if CUI is identified in any spot in your contract, you are most likely going to have to be CMMC level 2 certified. There are 3 levels to CMMC. That's important to remember. Level 2 is the one that deals specifically with CUI, and it is definitely the one that's probably going to be the most common that contractors have to address. Level 1 is just a base level. That's at the FCI level, so it has nothing to do with CUI. And level 3 has to do with specific different subsets of CUI. And if you are a level 3, that's going to be identified in your contract. So Primes and subcontractors and MSPs all have to comply with CMMC. This is a really interesting one. So I've been with CMM in the CMMC ecospace pretty much since it began. I implemented CMMC way back in 2021 when it was still the version 1 where it was 130 controls. And it has definitely changed over time. And one of the things that has become very clear now, especially with the final rule coming out this past December, the CMMC final rule, one thing that's been made very clear now is that all tiers of subcontractors will be expected to comply. What does that mean? If I'm a prime contractor, let's say that I'm Noel Inc., and Noel Inc. has a prime contract with the DoD. I'm going to make these X widgets. These X widgets are super sensitive and they're CUI and there's a lot of sensitive information with them. So because of that, in my contract, the government puts a DFAR 7012 clause stating that I have to be NIST 800-171 compliant. Well, I, as the prime contractor, have already done that. So I think I'm probably fine. But I have multiple different subcontractors that I use for maybe parts supply. Maybe I have to share some of those CUI plans with those subcontractors. The minute that I let that CUI go out of my possession into that subcontractor that I've hired into their possession, I am now, as the prime contractor, responsible for whether or not that subcontractor is also NIST 800-171, meaning they too have implemented the 110 controls and 320 objectives successfully. There were a lot of subcontractors for a while who were hopeful that maybe it was just going to be the first tier down, maybe the second. Unfortunately, those hopes are now gone. It is every tier. So it doesn't matter if you're the first tier subcontractor or the 100th. If you are getting CUI and direct support of a contract from a prime, you are going to be expecting to adhere to DFAR 7012 and to the NIST 800-171 implementation. So that's very important. MSPs, that is a managed service provider. If you're not familiar with what a managed service provider is, those are people who do things like maybe you need help with implementing vulnerability management on your desktops and laptops that you're using. Maybe you don't want to do maintenance on your IT infrastructure. Maybe you have a managed service provider to address that. They can address all kinds of different things, but that's just some examples. Those managed service providers were told before the final rule came out that they probably would not have to be CMMC certified. That has now come out, and there's a little bit of gray area on this right now, but apparently in the next few months, there is going to be documentation from the DoD that states that an MSP, if they are storing or transmitting CUI in some way, they are going to have to be CMMC certified. So it's not all MSPs and not in all situations will an MSP have to be certified, but unfortunately it's still a pretty high number. So that's also something to remember. If you are going to use a managed service provider in support of your implementation, make sure they understand their responsibilities with CMMC, because if they don't, let's say you have a managed service provider who has never heard of CMMC and you don't talk to them until your assessment for whatever reason, and you get on the assessment and the assessor is going to say, well, hey, do you guys have a CMMC certification? And they go, no, we don't even know what that is. What's going to happen now is you've expanded out your entire assessment because now your assessment is going to also now include that managed service provider. So you're essentially paying for the managed service provider to have a CMMC certification done. So this is why I say this is very important, that you make very sure you understand where your managed service provider sits on their understanding of CMMC implementation, because you don't want to end up at the end going, oh gosh, now I'm doubling the cost and doubling the time because now a managed service provider is included in this. There are over 220,000 companies in the DIB that are probably going to be expected to do this. And I'll tell you that number is increasing every day because the federal government is now talking and has legislation out right now for mandating CMMC at a federal level for those sensitive data. So this is not going to contract, it's going to expand. So that's another thing to keep in mind. Obviously, the federal CMMC is probably a few years away at this point, but it is something to remember that if you want to keep working with the government, it's not just going to be the DoD anymore, it's going to be the federal space overall. So that number is going to grow. Next slide, please. So here's a really quick, very basic, straightforward timeline. So implementation for the CFR 32 final rule, it took effect on December 16th, 2024. And then January of 2025, as you see below, that's when CMMC assessments began. So what happened in December is that final rule codified everything we've talked about. Like, for example, hey, is any tiers down of subcontractors does this apply to? All of them. It made sure that, which is virtual desktop infrastructure could be used. There were a lot of different things that we all kind of questions about in CMMC that have now sort of finalized in that final rule. Then when we started having assessments in January, we've now got 6 months into a little bit over 6 months into assessments now. And there have been dozens and dozens of them that have been done. I think we're actually, might even be into the hundreds at this point of a total assessments that have been done. As those assessments happen, we're gaining new information. C3PAOs are agreeing more on different things, things better. As time goes on, these assessments are going to get even more streamlined, but right now we're still in the beginning and there's a little bit of stumbling. Coming soon is CFR 48. Now, it says coming soon, you don't have a date because we also don't have a date. So the only thing that we have heard from a perspective is Stacy Bastianic, who is the head of CMMC with DoD, has said that we should expect it before the end of the fiscal year, which would be before September 1st of this year. That could be tomorrow or that could be the 31st of August. We don't know. So just something to keep in mind that once CFR 48 comes out, that is the companion legislation to the CMMC final rule. So you see CFR 32 on the left, that's the CMMC rule stating what the actually is and making it a legal requirement. CFR 48 on the right is, well, how do I get this into a contract if I'm a government contracts person? I have no idea. CFR 48 makes it so you understand as a government contracts person how it can be applied into a contract and what the rules are with that. So that's why we haven't seen CMMC in contracts yet, is because CFR 48 is that companion legislation. Once that comes out and once that has its final effective date, because remember when it comes out, there is a 60-day review period by OIRA. So let's say that this comes out on the 31st of August, there'll be a 60-day review and it'll be the end of October that then CFR 48 can go into effect. The reason why CFR 48 is so important and knowing the date that it goes into effect is so important is because that's when a phased rollout of CMMC begins. Now, what does that mean? Right now, we're sort of just in this waiting, holding pattern. Once CFR 48 goes effective on whatever date that is, then you have 1 year where you can still only self-assess. Then after that year, the second year, you will be expected to have a CMMC certification for your contract. So if it's level 2 or level 3, you'll be expected to already have that done. So this is something to really remember. Once CFR 48 comes out, you have a year to get that assessment done. That's why so many people are doing their assessments early, because they know that that backlog is going to get crazy for people who are waiting that last minute. So it's just something to remember. If this is something you're prioritizing for your business and if your plan forward for growth, definitely you would want to start reaching out to different assessing organizations and see if you can get on schedules. But again, this is not required for until a year after the date for CFR 48 goes into effect. So it's want to make that very, very clear. This is a very good point at the end. Waiting until CMMC appears in contract requirements will be too late. The average organization needs a minimum of 6 months, and that is minimum for most organizations. I'll be honest with you, in the CMMC final rule, the DoD estimates 12 to 24 months for a lot of different companies. 6 to 12 months is what we see as more of our timeline with PreVeil, because we have a lot of assistance that we can offer for our customers. But remember, it very much depends on how much time you have available, what expertise you have available, whether or not you want to hire external help like a managed service provider or some kind of consultant to assist you. There's a lot of different pieces and parts to that number. So make sure that you really think about what availability you have and what kind of expertise you have in-house. Next slide, please. So what's required to meet level 2? So this is the 110 controls and the 320 objectives. We just have it broken down. And you see on the left-hand side, there's families, and then the big ones are access control, audit and accountability, identification and authentication, awareness and training, configuration management, and risk assessment. Those six, there are families totally, those six are most likely going to take up the most amount of your time and energy, quite frankly. Between that and the documentation, these be a lot to manage by yourself for sure. Now, granted, we have multiple customers who do this on their own. There's nothing that says you can't. I did it on my own. It's just don't feel bad if you decide that you do need external help, because we all need help from, time. There are a lot of technical safeguards that are a part of these, specifically these controls, like encryption, there's multi-factor authentication requirements, there's vulnerability management requirements, antivirus requirements, there's requirements on understanding access and, how they're accessing. There's just a litany of different things. The documentation piece, though, as crazy as it sounds, the technical safeguards and the technical solutions you have to implement, for the most part, I won't make a blanketed, statement. Plenty of people, I'm sure, who do struggle with that part of it. For the most part, in the 3.5 years I've been here at PreVeil, I've probably talked to hundreds and hundreds of customers who are going through CMMC implementation. I'd say 95% of them don't complain about the technology solutions. They complain about the documentation. The reason they complain about the documentation is there's so much of it. So first, you have to have a system security plan. Most system security plans are at least 100, 150 pages. Pretty much that's an average, I'll be honest. There are some people who go way far to the other end and have, 6 SPs, which seems a bit crazy to me. And there are other people who try to go smaller than that. But just for sort of a good litmus test, somewhere between 100 and 150 pages is probably pretty reasonable. But really, the point of the system security plan is to act as guidance through your implementation of NIST. So if I'm the assessor, I happen to be a certified CMMC assessor. If I came in to assess any one of your organizations, the system security plan is going to be my guiding document through that assessment, because each one of those control statements you respond to, each one of those objective statements you respond to, I'm going to look at that and then also look for artifacts and evidence to support that. Artifacts and evidence can be things like policies and procedures, your asset inventory list, your training that you're using for incident response, anything that you're doing from a lessons learned perspective after you have an incident. All of these things can be considered evidence and artifacts, screenshots, configuration settings. These are things that you're probably going to be asked for. So the more that you can write before the assessor comes in, the better off your assessment's going to be. I've said it once and I'll say it 1,000 more times. Documentation will make you or break you in an assessment. It can save you, absolutely your life in an assessment, and it can destroy your assessment just as easily. So make sure to focus as much as you can, although the technology piece is very important too. I don't want to underplay that. The documentation is in some ways even more important, because you need to be very sure that you are walking the walk and talking the talk. If you say in your system security plan that you're reviewing logs every week, you better be able to prove that you can do that. There's also training that's required in this. So you have to make sure that all of your CUI accessing employees, anybody who's going to be a part of that CUI boundary, they have a multitude of different trainings they're going to have to be a part of. They have to have role-based training, instant response training, risk-based training. You have to make sure that that training is done. The reason that we highlighted this is because we've had multiple different customers who have gotten dinged on training. It's one of the easiest ones to address. And a lot of people, I think, get distracted and they're a little more, difficult to speak, and they sort of gloss over that. So that's something very essential to remember. It's about technical safeguards, documenting, and training everybody who's involved. Next slide, please. So now we have some helpful resources. And Louise, this is actually for me, helpful resources that you have. So a GRC platform. This is a governance, risk, and compliance tool. You do not have to have any of these things. Just to make this very clear, everything you see on this slide is optional. Is it suggested? Absolutely. Is it a good idea? 100%. Do you have to do it? Nope. You do not, but these are good ideas. GRC platforms are really great because they organize all of your data. So remember, we're talking about all that documentation you have to do. You could either do it all in where you're scrolling up and down all the time trying to get everything, or you can use a GRC platform, which takes that information and makes it much easier to access, because it's usually an online platform where multiple people can work together, and you can, you can write all of your control statements, and then it will spit out your SSP at the end of it. So it's a little bit easier way to manage the information and the evidence collection and the monitoring, honestly. But again, totally optional. CMMC consultants, there are tons of them out there that can help you. There are registered practitioners and there are CMMC certified professionals, and also people like me, certified CMMC assessors who are also just working as consultants as well. It's important to choose somebody that makes sense for your organization, who has experience with what you specifically may be dealing with, whatever unique challenges your organization has. For example, if you're a machine shop, as a good example, maybe a consultant who's never worked with a machine shop may not be your best idea, but that has had some experience is maybe a better option. And again, just an example, CMMC consultants can help you with everything from documentation, technology implementation, and just be there to help you along the way. Templates and accelerators, that's something that we have at PreVeil. We have our PreVeil Compliance Accelerator. We have pre-built templates and assessment worksheets. We have compliance information and learning. I mean, it is 10 steps to compliance program inside of that. Any of these, again, totally optional, but it definitely shaves off the time and it can shave off a lot of the money as well if you get really good ones. So, for example, most of our customers who use our accelerator, when, about maybe 5 or 10 hours a week, to that they're actually spending time on their compliance implementation. Most of our customers get through to 110 ready within 4 to 6 months. So it definitely can shave off some time and some money. But again, this is up to you and not something you have to do. Readiness assessment. This can also be called a gap analysis, a mock assessment. It's got a lot of different terminology for it. Readiness assessments are something we highly, highly recommend as a readiness assessment. So let's say that you're ready to go, you've got your C3 PAO, you're going to get assessed, and well, how do you know that you're ready for it? Maybe you've done an internal self-assessment. That's great, but maybe it would be nice to have somebody come in and externally validate that you did all of that right before spending the money for an actual final assessment. That is what a readiness assessment is. It's a smaller version of an assessment. It has a smaller dollar amount that you have to spend on it, and you can catch those little issues or areas of concern before you go through your final assessment, which is why we highly recommend it. But again, very voluntary. Next slide, please. And now this, Luis, if you'd be so kind, we would love to hear more about some of the key players in the CMMC ecosystem.
I mean, practicing. Well, let me say I'm not an expert in cybersecurity. I have been neck deep in the CMMC ecosystem because a couple of years ago, our Florida Apex team started creating some primers that we believe we shared with the rest of the 93 centers. This was starting a couple of years ago. Most of you may have heard of Project Spectrum, and that's an organization that is supposed to help both Apex Accelerator clients and the DIB navigate this ecosystem. Here's the issue that I see, though, and I hope to meet with Project Spectrum soon. There's 500 of us in Apex Accelerators nationwide, 12 in Florida, and there's only one Project Spectrum, and I don't believe they have, this is a personal opinion, the number of consultants they need for all of us to just point the finger to them. That's not being enough. Not to mention the resources that they have are quite they're not, in my opinion, so much for the client or Apex consultant looking to learn how this works. A major disconnect that I see is very little mention of the Cyber AB. The Cyber AB is the organization responsible for implementing this. They're the ones tapped by the DoD. And as Noah was mentioning, there's a lot of consultants, but not as many as they're going to need. And I'm going to go through, different quick. You have the RPs and the RPAs, right? But they're registered practitioner and registered practitioner advanced. They're not certified. And then you have the CCPs and the CCAs. The CCPs are certified, and you can find all these on the Cyber AB marketplace. And there are hundreds of those, and they can really help with the gap assessment, with the remediation, fixing the gaps. And then there's the CCAs. The CCAs are the only ones that can actually do the assessments with a C3 PAO. and there's only 70 C3PAOs at the moment. They hope to have 100 by the end of the year, but that's been growing very slowly. And it takes three, a minimum of three on each assessment. So, and one of the questions somebody was asking, what's the general to this? Well, CCAs get paid pretty well. You have to have three of them. The C3PO has to come in for at least a week. You're talking really, and these are just numbers, basic numbers, $40,000 for a C3PO, and that can go up to, according to the $150,000. But I could easily see that depending on how many COI endpoints you're going to have. As Noel was mentioning, you don't have to have your whole organization involved in COI. You really control that by the endpoints. But once those endpoints are defined, everything that flows from there needs to be CUI. And something that was mentioned just a couple of minutes ago that I wanted to highlight was the MSP portion, the managed service providers. There is a out there that started to list which ones have been CMMC level 2 certified, but as noted, it needs to flow down. And they're referring to MSPs as external service providers, MSPs and SSPs. And they do make the differentiation between that and a cloud service provider, like FedRAMP and FedRAMP equivalent like PreVeil. And what happens here is now you have 110 controls. That's a lot. Plus 320 that actually go into that, because some controls have 4 or 5 different parts. Just keeping track of that is a nightmare. But there is a way to share some of that responsibility. And that's done through a shared responsibility matrix. And that's how an organization like PreVeil, actually one of the few that is not only in this case equivalent, but can help you with other portions of that same thing. You could migrate some of your responsibilities to the MSP, but they have to be certified at the same level that you are. So in a nutshell, really get to know the Cyber AD. They have a monthly town hall, pre-recorded and available on their website, and it's cyberab.org. Apex Accelerators, previously known as Procurement Technical Assistance Centers. We've been around for 50 years. We used to be under the Defense Logistic Agency, and now we're under the Department of Defense Office of Small Business Programs. And our mandate is to help really anybody that is either in the federal ecosystem or wants to grow within government contracting. And as I said, there's 500 of us nationwide. They work by, and you could look them up on the National Apex website, NEX. C3PAOs, we're talking about them. There's third-party, certified third organizations, I believe. Even
assessment. That was close. Yeah.
They're the only ones that can actually do the assessments. So you really want to, make that to your, they really understand that. Everything else you do, you can do your own. You can involve anybody you want and everybody you want, as you meet the requirements. But you have to have a C3PAO assessment. And you renew every 3 years. And that's where, keeping in place that you can access, and more importantly, your assessors can access, right? It's so critically important. And another question I saw in the Q&A was, how long does it, I mentioned, 10 days, that needs to be on-prem, depending on, whether or not, a physical check your doors, remotely. Like that. I'm not even that familiar with DIPCAT myself.
Oh, I am. I get Luis. So the DIBCAC is the Defense Industrial Base. Is there this Defense Industrial Base Cybersecurity Assessment Center? So this currently, when we were talking about DFAR 7012, there's also a companion piece of legislation or a companion piece of regulation that you probably have in your contract as well. If you have a 7012 clause, you also probably have what's called a 7020 clause. That clause came out, I believe, in 2020. It's in pretty much every DoD contract at this point. And what it does is give the DoD the ability to come on site at any time they deem necessary to do an assessment of whether or not you are actually adhering to the DFAR 7012 clauses or any other clauses in your contract. The people who would come and do that investigation is the DIBCAC. So they are part of DCMA, and they will do any sort of random reviews of different organizations. They're working with DOJ and the False Claims Act right now to find people who have been lying about their compliance over the past few years since DFAR 7012 came out. DIBCAC also is who's responsible for doing level 3 CMMC certifications, as well as what they call DIBCAC high certifications, which are sometimes needed in different situations. So yeah, you don't want the DIBCAC calling is basically the long and short of it.
And what I have noticed lately is they have finding companies.
Quite a bit, quite extensively.
And Project Spectrum is a company and a lot of good resources on their website. You'll have to be your own judge of how effective resources have been. I believe there's room for some improvement there, and that's something that I'll be working on with some of the leadership, I hope. And that's pretty much for the ecosystem. The other thing that I did want to mention is that this takes time. You can't do it overnight. They're saying, even 6 months. Yeah, if the internal resources and they're working, with everything consistently. But if it's a touch and go and it's just somebody there part-time and working with externals, it's going to take a long time to get this done.
Yeah. Absolutely. You're absolutely right. Thank you so much. And the only thing that I'll add to that is it really does depend on how much effort you put in. It really does. Can we move on to the next slide, please, Orly? Thank you again, Luis. So let's look at a real world case study. This is actually one of our customers at PreVeil, a company called Envision that got 110 out of 110 on their CMMC assessment. What was really amazing about them, you see this little quote over here, they saved an insane amount of money coming with us versus GCC highs. You see over 90% they saved the cost. This is a real world example, a real customer of ours. They saved an insane amount of money by going with us instead of with GCC high. They deployed PreVeil secure email and file storage because that's what most of our customers do, since we are an end-to-end encrypted email and file storage platform, which we'll talk about more in a second. And they successfully passed their CMMC assessment first go round. There weren't any issues. They didn't have any problems. It was a smooth and easy walkthrough of their hand controls. They did end up partnering with a CMMC consultant because they decided that internally didn't have the knowledge and the expertise, just like Luis and I were just talking about, or the time to be able to do that. They made the decision to outsource that. Just like Luis was talking about with an MSP, it's the same thing with a consultant. You can outsource some of that responsibility. Now, something that I definitely want to make very clear, the consultant cannot take responsibility for your entire implementation. That is still yours. Your CUI boundary is always going to be yours, and that responsibility will always fall on you. But if you have a consultant, a lot of times it can speed things along. Obviously, they're going to cost money, so that's something to consider and engage. But this is a great example of, relatively small, 33 users, nothing crazy, being able to get through their CMMC implementation pretty quickly. And they actually, I believe, checked this right before we got on this webinar. They did it in less than 6 months. So again, it is very doable, but again, make sure that you understand if you have a long, let's say you have a very long runway for when you need to get CMMC certified. Maybe you don't really have to do that until next year. Okay, well then maybe, you can take a little bit more time with it, but it's something to remember with everything that we've talked about. You also need to consider, the C3, how few we have very few auditors available. There's going to be a backlog. There's a lot of things to consider here. So you may be sitting there and thinking I've got plenty of time, but you may not. Another thing to think about too is look at the market that this company now has, because they are 110 out of 110. So it's a great way to get your business out there and to get more business with the DoD and eventually also in the federal space, since that's where CMMC is going to be moving next.
And I want to clarify something for those that don't, GCC highway.
Oh, thank you.
It's very expensive. That's what it is. Is that always a Microsoft product?
Yeah, that is a Microsoft product. Yes, sir.
Yeah. And not only expensive, we all use Microsoft. I use Microsoft. We're using Microsoft right now sometimes, right? But it's horribly expensive. It has for each different position, they have to have a different license, and they're all it's
very convoluted. Yeah. Very
Whereas for organizations, that's the way they have to go, right?
Yeah, understood.
If you have a choice, the idea behind this whole thing is try and share as much responsibility as you can with others.
Absolutely. Thank you, Luis. Next slide, please, Orly. So that was a segue, Luis, into PreVeil. So as Luis just mentioned, we are a great alternative to GCC High, which is a Microsoft. GCC High stands for the Government Commercial Cloud High. There's several different of it, but that's the one that is usually used for compliance. So PreVeil is a good alternative to that. We are end-to-end encrypted, so we can be used for ITAR. If you have anyone that you're working with who has ITAR, we are good up to the ITAR level. We are end-to-end encrypted, so we work for the ITAR carve-out, the end-to-end encryption carve-out, if you're familiar with that. We're used by over 1,700 defense contractors, and we have 20, I believe we're even at 26 or 27 now, PreVeil customers who have gone through MSPs, CMMC, just regular, organizations that have used PreVeil to get 110 out of 110 on their CMMC assessments. So we're end-to-end encrypted email and file storage. Everything is protected. We already talked about the fact that we are, FedRAMP, but also have a FIPS 140-2 validation on our encryption, which is required for CMMC. And we also, on outside of our very simple, straightforward technical stack, because again, it's just email, file storage. It doesn't change anything you're doing now. You add it to what you're already using. In fact, we have multiple customers who use, just regular Microsoft commercial and then have PreVeil on top of that. So that way you don't have to migrate over to something different all at once. We also have the compliance piece. So we have our compliance products, the PreVeil Compliance Accelerator. We have a 10 steps to compliance inside of that. So if you're one of those people who's just brand new to CMMC and you're like, I don't know how I'm going to do this. Where do I start? What do I do next? What I don't understand. We have you covered. We've got a learning management tool that has videos and documentation and information and guidance on each one of the steps. And then on top of that, we also have a fake company we invented, our Acme company, that is our DIB company. And we created all of the documentation that that company would need to get through a level 2 CMMC assessment. So that's the SSP, all the procedural and policy documentation. Things like that you're going to be using are provided. How are you to track your inventory? Everything that we can possibly think of from an assessment standpoint that one of our customers might need documentation wise, we've put it in there. And then on top of that, as part of access to the accelerator, you also have access to myself and my team. So like I said, I myself am a certified CMMC assessor and a certified CMMC professional. We have others on staff who take these calls. We're not going to be implementing it for you, unfortunately, but we can answer questions and help you walk through whatever questions you may have or issues that you're having while you're implementing CMMC. We're here to support that too. And then we also have a massive group of partners. So all these different acronyms we've talked about, like RPs and RPAs and CCPs and CCAs and C3PAOs and all of those, we have tons of those, hundreds of those that we partner with. So these are trusted partners who understand how PreVeil works. They understand the really unique situations that our customers have when it comes to CMMC implementation. And it's just a fantastic way of knowing who you're going to be working with, because otherwise, without that trusted group of partners, you're essentially just going on the CyberAB marketplace and just picking somebody randomly. Whereas we can actually curate recommendations for you and go ahead and issue introductions, which makes it a little bit easier. Next slide, please. So PreVeil's network to support Apex. We've got co-marketing opportunities, access to 25 plus free events per year. We do 20,000 attendees free. So awesome. Just like what we're doing today, we do these types of things all the time. We have dedicated sales, compliance, and partner teams. So I myself am the chief compliance officer. So we have a dedicated team for that. We have a dedicated director for our partner teams, and dedicated, VP for is very much soft, but also we communicate together as well. So it makes for a much more holistic approach. Our internal team offers a variety of services to help you. We already talked about some of them just a moment ago. And we also offer free 15-minute compliance calls. If you go on the PreVeil website right now, you can feel free to schedule a 15-minute call and have a conversation about really any compliance questions you may have. So getting started today, the sooner and fastest you can do this, honestly, is probably going to be the better. You've heard It's going to take somewhere between 6 to 12 months. You know that there's C3PAOs and assessors. We've told you different reasons why you should want to get started. One of the best ways you can get started as a very first approach is just going onto PreVeil's website and downloading a free copy of PreVeil itself. You can go ahead and be a free PreVeil user today. You can't use that, as your ODU compliance, but you can definitely download a free account. Feel free to look at it and feel around. It's something that you think would be really great. And if you are interested, you can always reach out to us and we can give you more information on the compliant version. Next slide, please. So I just want to say thank you to everyone who joined. My information is here. If you have any questions or anything that maybe you information about something I've talked about with PreVeil, or you want more information on the accelerator, or you just have a random question about compliance, I am happy to help. The email is there. And Luis, thank you again so much for joining us. This has been fantastic.
No, thank you. Just answering a few questions there on the Q&A.
Absolutely. And Orly, I think we have a little bit of time left if there are any other questions that we wanted to take.
But first of all, great job, Luis and Noel. Thank you very much. One question there were a couple questions that were asked in the Q&A and we didn't, Luis, answer them, but I think it would be to give the whole audience an opportunity to hear an answer. So is Google Workspace, if Google CMMC FedRAMP equivalent, if we use a Google Workspace, are we compliant with the requirement our cloud database is CMMC compliant? I think
so. And could be off on my information on this, but the last time I checked, Google Workspaces, just out of the box, regular Google Workspaces, is not CMMC compliant. There is a different version they have that you can use for CMMC compliance. I don't know price difference or anything like that is, but that is the last thing that I heard. I'm pretty sure regular workspaces will comply with DFAR 7012 requirements for incident reporting. Don't think you can use them for CMMC. I do think you have to do that second version. So I would look into that. But like I said, I could be wrong on that. The last time I checked was a couple months ago.
And that's what I heard just recently from my friend, releasing something new. But in order to configure the whole thing properly, it's expensive to handle.
Yeah.
It's not out of the box like a FedRAMP.
the other thing I would add there is just in terms of level of proof of effort, right? PreVeil has, we're adding numbers every day to the number of compliant companies we have, right? As of yesterday, it was 26. Later this week, it'll be 27. So every week we're adding a new customer that's achieved CMMC using our platform. I have not heard of any that have gone through the Google Workspace solution and become compliant.
No.
Yeah.
All right, here's another good question. Do you anticipate that the self-assessment for level 2, do you anticipate that the self-assessment requirement for level 2 will go away?
Let me let you
Please.
all know that I already answered this online this way, so we don't step over each other. Personally, I thought this whole thing would go away. Many did. Not the case. Once Rule 48 gets released, the clock begins. You can self-attest for the first year. It's not going anywhere. The thing with this, it was the board. They've been talking about this for so many years. People are like, I'm tired of hearing about it. But here it is. 48 is about to be released.
Yeah, no, absolutely, you're right. And yeah, I would have loved to have been able to do less. As someone who implemented these 110 controls, I can tell you there were a lot of choice words that I had when I found out I had to implement this. So I completely who was like, oh, maybe it'll go away. So remember, absolutely to your point, Luis, it is not going. And the assessment, that is not even part of CMMC. Remember, that is already a requirement in DFAR 7019. So if you have
years ago.
already done, exactly. It's been around for 6 years. That's not going away either. So your self-assessment is always going to be there as long as you have that DFAR 7019 clause.
Right. Last question here is what is the percentage of DIB businesses expected to be level 2 versus level 3?
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah. And ready to chime in too, but my understanding is a relatively small percentage. Honestly, I haven't even seen anybody go through a level 3 assessment yet, if that gives you an indication. And I think Matt Travis, who is the CEO of the Cyber AB, I believe he stated in the May call that there had been like 300 CMMC level 2 assessments. And I don't think any of the CMMC level 3s have been done yet. And if they have, it's not been very many. So to answer that question, we're not 100% sure on the number, but I don't think it's going to be very high.
Here's an interesting point, though. In my day job, I did get from a is being asked to satisfy level 3, and I couldn't believe it. I just no, then why? What they were doing. But yeah, there it is. Clearly that they need to be, and it was react Q&A with the CO. So that was kind of weird, but I have seen very, very few. There are some.
Yeah, very few though.
But even level 2, I think that's still a bit of a mystery.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is.
Following up on that question, it's how will the DoD clarify solicitations require level 2 compliance?
So that will be part of the RFP, the RFI, it will in there, or that's what they're telling us, is that they will include it at that point, and there will be the DFAR 7021 clause. That's going to be what CMMC is. So when you get the contract, it will actually state in the DFAR 7021 clause, it will state what level you're expected to be, either 2 or 3.
Now here's the problem. They're telling us it's coming out, right? Phased over 3 years. But they're not telling us what agencies are doing it first, what sectors, what. So
who knows? Basically, unfortunately, we don't know. And to Luis's point, in the final rule, it stated that 156 contracts will be identified to do CMMC in the first year. We have no idea who those 156 contracts are. So,
or those IDIQs or
yeah, right. Who knows?
Here's one thing I can say as we wrap this up. With everything going on in the federal government, there's less people doing more. And when there's less people doing more, they're going to find the simplest way to do what they need to get done.
Yeah, that's good. Very good.
Last question before we sign off today.
Sure.
Is there any way we can assess our requirements and get the score for NIST or CMMC assessments? I think what's behind here is like, can we get our score before actually, going and get full assessment?
Yeah, absolutely. You can obviously do your self-assessment, and then this would be where that readiness assessment or that mock assessment would come in that we talked about. That would be your opportunity to get that validated that you actually did implement the 110 controls successfully.
Now, finding a resource, even just a list for that, right? And the Project Spectrum does have something, but it's just a check mark. I created this is something I created myself, Cyber Gap. CYBERGAP.us.
In the chat to everyone, and so everyone can have the URL.
Okay, chat.
See where's this chat? Just make sure it's that little blue box is saying everyone.
Yeah, because that sounds like a great resource.
It's free. Host and panelists? No.
To everyone.
Give me that option.
Okay, well, just put in host and panelists, and then I'll make sure it goes to everyone.
Okay. Yeah, great. Be very interesting, guys, girls. A lot of changes gone. The FAR's totally be written. So good luck to all of us. CMMC just happened to intersect with all of this. Who could have guessed? Yeah,
I know. Never a dull moment in DoD regulation.
All right, everyone. I just put it in the chat to everyone, cybergap.us, and I will. So now everyone has it. Luis, I can't thank you enough for the opportunity to have us speak to the Apex community and for inviting Noel and PreVeil. Thank you very much. We are at the top of the hour, so thank you, everyone. You guys can sign off.
Thank you so much.
Take care, everybody. Bye.
Bye.